Hi, everybody. My name is Lily Kate. I'm 19 years old. I grew up homeschooled in the Woodlands, Texas, and I'm a speech and debate national champion and a social media influencer and spent a lot of time in LA. And I'm here today to support this bill because I have firsthand seen the destruction of transgenderism, specifically for people who are young. And so I want to talk about first how this bill literally will protect children from life-altering decisions made by themselves, their parents, or doctors that will have lifelong consequences that they at that time are not able to even conceive of those consequences. And it will add to the definition of child abuse, which is something that we urgently need. And will add to the definition of surgeries and procedures that are harmful and irreversible. And I do want to say, for everybody who's watching online or on TV, this book will not deal with transgender adults how they wish to make that decision with their own bodies. This is specifically dealing with children. And it's dealing with dark stories that are tainting our experimental medicine with a dark streak that cannot be erased. So what I find really interesting, actually, when I was doing a little bit of research on this is the Obama administration actually agrees with this sentiment. And in 2016, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services revisited the question of whether sex reassignment surgery should be covered by Medicare plans, despite having received requests of its coverage that they want it to be mandated. The administration actually refused on the grounds that there was a lack of evidence that it was actually beneficial. So although their statement was about taxpayers and healthcare receivers, which are typically older people, I would argue that the proposition, if it would have been about a child, their answer would have been the same, if not more overtly, a no. Because Michelle Obama spent a lot of time reading to children Dr. Seuss books that are now canceled. So I would say that she'd be in favor of this. So they also put out a statement regarding their thought process. Quote, based on evidence, on thorough review of clinical evidence available at this time, there is not enough evidence to determine whether gender reassignment surgery improves the health outcome for Medicare beneficiaries with gender dysphoria. So another example of someone who is doing this is actually the UK. And I know a lot of people here don't like them, and yes, we declared independence from them a while ago, but maybe we can learn something from them because, quote, in a stunning decision with international implication, the United King's High Court ruled on December 12, 2020, in a court decision that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones used in gender dysphoria minors as experimental should not be given to children under 16 without a court order. They later added that 17 years old was also within that bracket. And they clarified that the consent of this issue was not in the depth of information that minors were given, but that, quote, there is no age appropriate with an appropriate way to explain to many of these children that losing their fertility or full sexual function may mean to them in later years. That adolescents find it difficult to contemplate and comprehend what their life will be like as adults. And they do not always consider the long-term consequences of these actions in it. And perhaps as obvious as this statement is, there's a growing necessity for the obvious and common sense in our society. But I also like to say that statistics are really on our side for this one. According to heritage.org and the book that's now been also banned from Amazon, When Harry Became Sally, trans people are all more likely to commit suicide in adulthood from early transitioning. And we have plenty of stories to back this up. Fortunately, I don't have time to tell them today, but there are lots of them. So more than 1 in 4, so 27% of trans young people have attempted to commit suicide, and 9 in 10, so 89% have thought about committing suicide. 72% have self-harmed at least once after early transitioning. So John Brooks, after extensive study on if children grow out of gender confusion, said, actually this is to build off a point that was made earlier, for decades to follow up, studies of transgender kids have shown that a substantial majority, anywhere from 65 to 94%, eventually cease to identify as transgender. If that's not something we should give the benefit of the doubt to, then I don't really know what is. So 94% of these suffering children can be set straight and will be set straight by their natural biology that has been given to them by our Lord and Creator. But right now, in a culture, more broadly speaking, we are encouraging kids to get sex changes, and we say it's good for them, and we're always going to wait until they commit suicide to ask ourselves, maybe this wasn't such a good idea to push through our legislation. And I can tell you that this is not something my generation wants to stand for. Our society has no room for experiments that end in suicide, depression, or regret. This should never be considered okay on the basis of empowerment, liberation, and freedom. Protecting our children has to be a nonpartisan issue. And our government, especially from my favorite and the best state of them all, Texas, has no room for legalized child abuse. What kind of society stands for that? So we must pass this bill before tragedy happens to our defenseless children, who are the same age as the children who are my little brothers and little sisters. I grew up in a family of 8. So yes, I'm what a lot of people dislike, but I have very young siblings and they're malleable. You can get them to do anything for you. Never would I want to manipulate them in that way. So here's my call to action. I see, actually, I'm surprised there's a lot of young Gen Zers in the room, which is really refreshing to see. But we stand resolved as young people who love our children and love our siblings that this bill has to be passed. I urge Generation Z to start thinking aside from their emotions for once, to put logic first, and to start protect people who are our age. And I want Gen Z to stand with me to fight against child abuse, to fight against indoctrination, nonsensical and non-consenting decisions. So I stand here and very proudly proclaim BLM, Babies' Lives Matter. Thank you.